concept, and I especially love the way that realism you brought to the series. That way, like it is a little out there, but it also feels really possible. And I was just wondering, could you talk a
Good.
bit about how when you heard about when you got the script and you started the production design, like what was that process like, and how does that change from when you're first starting the series to each new season?
Right. So when I first interviewed with Greg, you have your script, you read it, you get super excited. One of my favorite things is always thought experiments of the future. I love where we're going as human beings and pushing boundaries constantly. But you sort of think, okay, what would I bring to the table? And one of my things was that technology is not flashy. It's as we move forward, it's very clean and small and invisible. And that particularly in a TV show where you don't have a ton of money to do, like to constantly build new things to build that world out, you kind of have to reduce it and say less is more and be like, yeah, here's that thing. Thanks. Super cool. But, in the future, it's not important. So why should we show it off? So starting with that as a baseline, right? Then you do really well things that you do have to show for the future, but you don't overemphasize it on camera too much. Um, so that the world does feel realistic, right? And that technology is just so integrated that you barely notice it. Uh, and then when I looked at a lot of industrial design products when we do have to build something and try to make it look as real world industrial design prototype as possible. And of course, we always research and see what's coming and what people are talking about. There's tons of articles constantly about like, oh, so and so's experimenting with something at MIT that one day could become this. And we're like, one day could be upload. You're like, yeah, yeah. So
That's all.
does
That's
that
all.
make
So
sense?
yeah. So the idea of the hand phone, was that you then? Was that you could give it, or is that like already in the script? Because I thought that was like that's such a good way to say is like technology is invisible, but it's also kind of essential, and I just thought that was like a great way to do that.
Right. That is definitely coming from Greg in the very, very beginning. He'd been thinking about this show, I think, for 30 years before he was able to make it. So he had a huge inventory of things in his mind that he thought would be something that he wanted to see, like a self-driving bike, self-driving cars. And then you're asking that question about how it changes every season. Well, we stay grounded in what we establish. We don't, if we like it, we don't just redo it just because, but there are new levels of technology that come out just when it's based around the story. So example would be the hologram desk, right? So in the script would be, they're in a hologram boardroom, but it wouldn't have descriptors of like they're sitting at a lucite shaped wingback chair and the light comes out of the table and the hologram looks like this. That when you read the script, you sort of start as a designer, you start thinking, oh, okay, again, how do I want to ground this? I want to see the technology enough that the light comes out. It's not just like holodeck kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
Where uh, you're because we don't want to make people believe that they're in Lakeview, where it's all or the metaverse, where they're in a world where anything's possible because it's all online. That this is still the real world. So you come up with ideas and mood boards, and you talk to Greg and the director, and you say, "I was thinking this," and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I was thinking this too." And then you start illustrating, going back and forth, and then a mere few days or weeks later, you're building it and bringing it to set.
That's cool. I like
Yeah,
It's like it's so amazing to me, like how much uh one like how much I don't understand like how much like of the process of it, but two is just like kind of
yeah,
how much you really like. There's so much that like most people don't even think about, and with upload too, like could you talk about like the difficulty of having Lakeview, which is the world where everything can happen, and so it could
yeah.
be the 1930s to the future versus the real world where it's still kind of has to remain grounded. Like how is that balancing the two?
Sure. So Lakeview, for example, we just push it a little bit. It's idyllic. Everything's perfect all the time. The colors are all super coordinated. It looks like a a glossy magazine, Ralph Lauren from a day gone by. We always try to keep the weather a nice, it's a postcard. So in many ways, we all know what those commercial glossy photos look like. And so you just lean into that and you just make it as much detail as you can. Then and it's all made from like plush, cozy, woody, warm materials from the day gone by. When materials like that were abundant. And then in the real world, it's like, okay, so we're not going to use these warm colors, right? So Lakeview is very warm and golden and sunset colors. And then the real world, Brooklyn it's grays and blues and blacks, and it's grimier. So that there's separation between the two worlds at least when you're editing together too, you should know just within the color palette and the lighting that you've changed worlds. Um, and then in the real world, you add the stuff that's the garbage, the graffiti, the overcrowding, the unglamorous lighting, the inconveniences of being a human being, right? So you just make sure that every time you have an opportunity to do that without again like overemphasizing it, right? I'm all more like, if it's real, like usually there's small details that you notice that in the real world that can go a long way on a set, like the real world, like showing drywall screws sticking out of a wall or dirt on a wall or HVAC sticking out in an inappropriate place, sprinkler heads, wires, cables, things like that. So push a little bit more of those details in the real world. And then there's none of those in Lakeview. There's no light switches. There's no cable. I mean, maybe you'll bust me and you'll find a cable and a lamp in Lakeview, but there really doesn't need to be, other than it maybe makes people feel comfortable that they're in a human space. But yes, there's actually, now that you've reminded me, like there are tiny little details like that, like just getting down to cable management. There's no cable management in Lakeview. Right.
There's no
Yeah.
cable managed for the people in it, but I imagine for your team, there's a lot of it. So like to make a lamp seem like it doesn't need
Yeah.
power, that's a whole task on its own and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because the crew comes in and come over here, take everything out, then you got to put it back again and make it look pretty. So there's a person whose job it is on set to go back in, reestablish continuity, and then fluff those. For example, Lakeview, fluff those pillows with the little crease in the middle, make sure all the curtains are hanging straight. But in let's say Ivan's apartment, just make sure it constantly looks messy. Like don't clean it up by accident. Like the food should be on the couch and on the floor and in the nooks and the crannies. Things can look rotting. It's okay. The bathroom's not clean. Yeah.
Speaking of like Ivan's room, I wanted to ask about like the storytelling aspect of the production design. Like,
Mhm.
do you cater it to like aside from the script, do you cater it to the character to like how do you purposely change the environment to like reflect their growth, reflect their moods and stuff like that? Like,
Yeah.
and then like what goes into the process of like reflecting that? Like, how do you bring it with colors, with like oh, why can't I write Alicia's character, like especially like her big,
Right.
change from season one. Like I noticed her environment change, so it's like what else goes into that process to like reflect her change with the production design?
Right. So since we're saying they're humans, so you sort of draw from your own life, friends, and experience. Like, oh, when I got a little bit more money, what was the first thing you do as a woman? You go out and buy like new sheets, maybe some plants and better lighting. Maybe change the color. You're definitely adding drapes. You're adding these layers that are easy to rush out and buy and to install in your house, right? And then you can come home and you feel like, this is a this is like a glow up of what I had. So Alicia's definitely moving, her character is moving through the financial stream quite well. And it's reflected greatly in her wardrobe. She's not just buying what she has to, she's buying what she wants. And this reflected in her apartment as well. It's she's not living where she has to, she's living where she wants to. And as she gets more money, she's adding things that she wants, including artwork. So it's your job, it's my job to think like that. Like how does a person, if I was this person, what would they be doing? And then Ivan, you have to pretend, oh yeah, okay, so Ivan's apartment is the Bachelor, is gross. And Greg had written him as like he's definitely a Luddite in many ways. So he's like a 12, like an 18-year-old guy. Like you're just like, okay, I remember dating those guys and they had pizza boxes and the sink was constantly full of stuff. Like he's a person that also has an online world. So, and a job, he's not coming home and thinking of cleaning it up. He doesn't care. You might even be colorblind. So you would, this is like, you just start talking out loud like this and you're like, oh, he could be colorblind. Therefore his colors won't match and nothing coordinates, just buying things essentially. You just give him the personality that's written for him. And then you begin to flesh that out with not the words, but the images that would match that kind of a person. He also lives in a part of Brooklyn. I was like thinking, okay, it should be super compressed. If you notice outside his windows, people are living in shipping containers. There's an old building that's partially refixed with like 3D concrete printing. It's super compressed living. And for practicality, because we had so many characters in that set, his set should be really small, but you can't have a tiny room with like 6 characters in it over the course of a season. So I built this backstory in my mind where he had a roommate who like went off to Thailand or something and then didn't come back. And he's just like, well, I guess it's mine now. Like just living here. So it was a space for 2 that he naturally just took over. But this is me. Like this is me justifying what we need to do. And then you just add layers like that.
Are there any details that you feel like it was a huge character statement that a lot of fans probably missed for any of the characters from like season 1 to season 2?
No, I think everything is translating for sure. There's always going to be little layers and details that you put in that maybe the camera doesn't catch super quickly. Example would be in the AI classroom this season. Some of the posters on the employee notice board are in binary. But I don't think that we need to like start on it and pull away and haha, look how smart we are. It's like it's there. Somebody is going to notice it at some point, and leaving things for people to discover after maybe a first viewing or the first time we see that set. Because we do know that people stop and look around now with the screen grabs. I think that those things will be picked up on, but at first blush, you're watching the show differently than you would the second time. And some of those little tiny nuanced details, like the labels on, the spray can for the spray ham or tiny little things like might get missed, but we have to make them all of them. Otherwise we will get sued if we don't own all that stuff. Yeah.
Last question for you. Just get like being so like I love the like learning more about production design, but I feel like I'm still very new to kind of even approaching the subject. What can interviewers like me, fans who want to know more about production, like what is it that we should as a production designer, what is it that like we're not asking or we're not talking about that you really want to talk about and let us know?
Oh, that's such a good question. I wish I actually had more time to actually think deeply, but I think it's understanding that we do build everything. We are all the non-scripted storytelling, and we have a huge department of people that have to do everything from building the entire set, finding the locations, making every single graphic, making sure that every single piece of artwork on the wall, we know its source and can give that like the paperwork to the lawyers. There's the clearance process is incredibly deep. It requires like 6 people probably if you were to include the lawyers and the clearance coordinators and the art department coordinator, and then the graphics people. Like we had 3 full-time graphics people on our show. So it feels like there's a massive, if you're already doing the set design and working with the decorators and all that kind of stuff to make this world that has been written come to life, then you're also got this like side business of like graphic design that you're doing. So I think it would be just understanding that so much thought and detail goes down to everything, and that ultimately in the end you shouldn't notice that it happened. Successfully, it should feel like a very real world, and a lot of your work will just go, again, like technology, it will be invisible, but it will be there. And if it wasn't there, you would notice it, but you wouldn't know what was wrong, right?
Mhm.
So the psychological game in many ways, right? Does it feel right? Yes. We spent hundreds of man hours behind the scenes making sure that it worked then. No one would notice.